There are two ways to do form submits with React server components. You can either do it all on the server or have a mix between client components and server components. So Waku, React, ReScript, server components, that's what this video is about. Let's dive in. Okay, the first example, we'll look at a server-only component. We have a simple form where we need to guess the number. We have an input field, we're going to type in a number, we're going to send it to the server and then get a response back. So if I try 1, it wasn't 1. If I try 42, it was 42. You get how this works, but let's take a little bit of a deeper look in how does this effectively work. So if I re-render the entire page, a lot of stuff happens, it's Waku related, but the entire page had to load. When I enter my number and do my guess, we can actually see that this fetch request happened. So it is actually going to go to the server, get the entire rendered React tree back, and then reconciliate everything on the client. And this is the virtual DOM part where it's only really going to add this and clear out my input box. But let's first take a look at how this works in practice. So I have a component in a number guess module. I wire this up in my create pages in Waku. That's kind of where we do everything between our path and our component. So on this guess path, I want to mount my number component, and I want Waku to always render this on the server when I request it, because this is dynamic. The number guess thing itself is rather straightforward. It is a server component, so we didn't annotate anything at all. That means it's a server component. That's just how Waku and React server components work. No directive needed. We have this let guess check, so that is our server action. We do need that directive over here. We receive the entire form. So this is the DOM-based fetch API form data. And if we get that from the form data, we can use a helper that's binding to get the guess value. So this is just really browser specific APIs. We try to convert the guess to a number. So either we have it or we don't, and either it's an int or it's not, and then the guess is just an integer. We do a little check over here, and we're gonna populate the context data. So Waku has this notion of a context, and these are things that are specific to a single request. So it's like a object you can use to pass data throughout the entire request response flow. Basically, you have access in it in middleware, in server components. That's how you can sort of communicate things back and forward, but it's all scoped to a single request. We have a type guessed context over here. It either has a guess or it doesn't have a guess. So initially when the page renders, it won't have any guess, so that's why this is optional. Inside of our callback, our post form, we're just gonna set the guess, and then we're gonna call the unstable re-render route. That's basically indicating to Waku like, hey, I want the entire guess page to be re-rendered, which is what we saw in the browser. So the React component is going back from the server to the client, and that's what actually triggered it. We have a little server time as well. So if we go looking back in the browser, we'll see that this will update when we do a form post back. We will try and get our context data inside of the React components. Initially, this won't have any data, so we'll use that like show or react null later on. You have the form itself, we have the server data. The form takes an action. That action is our check guess. I have to use object.magic because the bindings of ReScript are still convinced that action is a string. In React 19, it's more than a string. It could be a string or an actual server-side function. In any case, what we do here is we pass in our check guess, and that's the magical part. Like, we don't need to specify or wire which URL path is this actually going to be. Waku takes care of that for us. What we do, we just pass it over here, and then we have the input. The input has name guess, so the name guess is how these match up, and that's how it gets the value. And there's a button submit, as you may have guessed. There's the guess itself, so initially we don't have it, we don't show anything, and either we have it, it's correct, we show the green thing, or we show the red thing. So going back to the browser one more time, we enter 12, we'll see that it executes our server function. Our payload is just like our actual guess. It does do this prefix 1_, that's a React spec kind of thing. But again, I don't really need to care about those finer details myself. I can just know that I'm getting a form data at the end of it. And the response is just the render of the React component inside of this JSON-like format. And then once React on the client receives that, it can do the virtual DOM reconciliation thing, and that's that's where we're seeing what we are seeing. The downside of this approach is that the entire page was re-rendered. So we even got the information for the nav bar, which is the thing over here, which is, it did not change, it was unaffected. And yeah, we're sending a little bit more React component JSON data over the wire than that's absolutely necessary. In terms of what the browser needs to do, this is going to be fine. Like the virtual DOM is going to do the bare minimum to clear this input field and show the success toast. That part is fine, but you know, we get the entire page and that maybe is a little bit much. We could also do a similar thing with a client component where we are just going to invoke a server function and get data back. And then the client takes that data and does something else with it. So another example is the login page. I am still working on that beer app, so that's actually the application we have open here. And if we want to log in, we're using a client component. I'm not going to show you the code first because it's, you know, visually it's going to look rather the same and it's going to do what you think it's going to do. But when we take a look, we have our login components. We are calling this logged in and the username from the off store. That is a piece of middleware. I'll get to that, but in essence, PocketBase allows for a cookie to be set, and that cookie can then be used for React server-side rendered applications, or if you are using something similar like Astro, that's basically what we're doing. We're using cookies to save the user information, and in essence there's going to be middleware looking for that cookie. If it has the cookie, it's going to set something to our context. Remember, context can be available in middleware and in React server components. So in this case, we actually have an off store. We are also just having derived state, which is our login, and if you are not logged in, we're going to use the login form. The login form is going to be a client component, or otherwise we're just going to do a form where we have this log out action where we're just going to show you like, hey, you're currently logged in as this username. Do you want to log out? Log out is in its separate page. And if we go to that, we can see that because it's a separate page, we need to annotate this with the use server as well for the entire file. What we're doing here is we're going to get the off store. We're going to do a clear of the authentication. So that's going to like flush the off token you have to talk with PocketBase, and we're going to say that we need the export to cookie. We're going to set that to our context data. So this set cookie is really like the string we want to end up in the set cookie, and we do that in the middleware. I'll get to that, and then we just like redirect to the home page. But so back to the login, we see that we have a login form here. We are passing in the action, the server components. So the logging itself is again a server action. We're gonna have a form. In here, I kind of went ahead and had like a separate file with form names. If I go to form names, these are just like a bunch of constants, just so I don't have any typos. The guess thing was a simple one, it's only one value. But for the other users, the other forms I have, I just created like separate modules which are constant and are like shared between client and server components. So we get the email, we get the password, we get the redirect URL. We're gonna do some pattern matching on that. If we got an email and a password, we are going to get PocketBase. We're gonna see if we can do the auth with password. This might fail, so there's a little bit of exception handling. We're just gonna basically set a string in the error if it failed or not. Maybe the email or password weren't present. And what we're going to do is going to return a state. So it's going to have an optional error. It might have a redirect URL. It might have an email. So the email would be set if you had the wrong password, and then we still want to pre-populate the email. This is going to be called from the login form, and the login form is our client component. So we need to annotate that with a use client. Over here, we have this login state. That's actually what this action will return. Sorry, it takes a form, which is generic in this part, but then returns a promise of login state. Well, that's the thing that we're returning at the end over here. Client component has its initial login state. We're going to check the URL if we need to do some redirect. We're going to put in an email of a user I created. There's no error to begin with. And then we're going to do the use action state, which gives you the state itself. So that's the data. It gives you a way to call or invoke the action. So that's actually a way to just invoke this ping. The action, we got that from our server, and there's this is pending if we're already calling the form or not. Because we're using the use action state hook, we can pass that to our action. We need an object magic again, but you get the idea. If there is a redirect URL, I'm actually going to put that into a hidden field. Then we have our email. So we just use state.email for a default value. If the email was wrong, then it just gets that back from the server action and uses that again. We have the password, login button, and then if there's an error or not. And that's basically how that works. We have more control over the state. We're only just really going to pass in the login state as a result from our action, because that's what use state expects. So in essence, we pass it in currently a login state over here. We start with an action, a React action. This is a little complicated, but basically it gets a state and a payload and it returns a promise of the state. The payload in this case is just a form. The state is the login state and that's a promise. And when we then have the form action, that's actually just a promise of units. Once you get to use these things, it does flow more natural, but I get that it's initially overwhelming. When we go back to the browser, we can see that, okay, I already have a correct password, so it's gonna have a wrong password. I'm gonna press login. It calls an endpoint that gives us back our value. So it's not the entire component to re-render. No, it's just the data. The value over here really is our login state. And then now we have an error that the login was unsuccessful, which is the thing we use in React client side to like render this error message. So if I just want a full refresh on that page, the password should be correct. If we go back to the login page, we actually are logged in this time, and then we're logged in as our user YouTube viewer, and there's a button to log out. So one missing piece in our story here is like the middleware. How did that actually work? After we did the create pages thing in our server-entry.jsx, we needed the default export to be something Waku expects it has like two things. It has how do I handle requests, how do I handle builds. And in the handle build, we can give it some middleware functions, which one of them is the authentication middleware, which I created. If we go to this authentication middleware, you can see that we're having a type for our context that we're going to use. So we're going to play with this set cookie. If one of the login components or the server actions actually, got the set cookie part, then we might need that after we called it. And then there's also a PocketBase instance. So we're going to use that instance one per request and do everything we need to, grab the PocketBase data. Initially, your context data, you can call get context data from Waku. So this is just Waku server get that data, which is initially going to be super empty because it's not going to have anything. So if it doesn't have anything, we're just going to create a PocketBase instance. This is just like a way to lazily create that. And then we're going to just set it on the data itself. So once we did that, we can have the PocketBase. Once we have the PocketBase, we can have derivative data like the off store, whether we're logged in, whether we're admin, etc. The middleware itself is just Hono middleware, where you take a context and the next request in the pipeline. We're going to check for the cookie header if we have it. If we do, we're just going to grab the off store where we can pass in the load from cookie. So that's something PocketBase specific, where you can give it a cookie header and it will then, set everything that you need in the off store. We are going to have the context data. So in essence, these are the same things. The context data off store is already a derivative from the context data. Not quite sure why. Later for the set cookie. So I could basically grab this and then that, and you get the idea, but it's all the same context data. We're going to check if our off store is valid. Then if it is valid, we're going to do a user refresh. That's just part of the documentation. So nothing special there. And then we're going to do the next request. So the next request could be render the component, or it could be that we're calling our server endpoints over here, our server action and login. So it could also just be this thing. That's in essence how middleware works. So this is the next thing. And then depending on whether that set cookie happened or not, we are going to update the cookie in the response headers over here in set cookie. The only point that this really happens is the moments that we're going to authenticate. So in this case, we got email password. We did authenticate with email password, and then we just grab the cookie string because we know that our login was successful and set cookie should be there. Then over here, we can see that we redirected to the home page afterwards. So that is the middleware for you. All right, so we have either everything on the server or a bit of a mix between client and servers. When do you use what? Well, as a consultant, I would say it depends. Anyway, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions on this. See you again in the next one. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff really. And tell me if there's anything else you want to see. Until we meet again.